Welcome to Everything But the Lesson Plan, the podcast dedicated to supporting teachers inside and outside the classroom. Today's episode explores an inspiring initiative called the Happy Teacher Revolution, a global movement focused on prioritizing the mental health and well being of educators. Joining us today is Danna Thomas, author of Happy Teacher Revolution, the educator's roadmap to claiming and sustaining joy. Together, we will discuss why teachers' well being is essential and how her movement creates a supportive community. We want to prioritize self care in 2025. Welcome to the show, Danna. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me, Francesca. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, and I'm just so glad that you answered the call. And I've been following you on Instagram and some of your initiatives. And so I'm excited that we're going to have this conversation today.
Yeah, me too. And I think it's so timely and not just for this year in 2025, but for all of our listeners in 2026 and
Mhm.
beyond. It's really
And
time for this
beyond.
content. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm excited for the chance to dive in deeper more.
Okay, so tell me about where you are right now.
Oh, I am in currently the Pacific time zone in
Okay.
California, Northern California. In my school bus, Begonia, my 25-foot long, 11-foot tall, short bus from Austin School District that's been converted into my tiny home that I've been living on. So I've been living on Begonia,
Wow.
and I've been on tour for my book, my debut book, Happy Teacher Revolution, The Educator's Roadmap to Claiming and Sustaining Joy. So I've been traveling,
Wow.
holding book signings alongside teacher support group meetings for educators all over the country. And Begonia is my home and my vessel and my ship on this odyssey that I've been on. And for anybody who's able to look on the video. I know on Spotify folks are listening, but make sure you go over and check out the YouTube video. Begonia is
Yeah.
totally converted to my home. So I have a stove and a sink and the bathrooms behind me with the shower. And there is the cockpit where I've driven her almost 10,000 miles at this point. She's
10,000.
oil
Oh my
change. Yeah.
God.
And she's sitting around 8,000 miles. So I know I need to get that oil change before 10. So
Wow. So that's definitely a different experience.
yeah,
The
it's
one I'm sure you're
mystical, it's the
embracing.
life. Magic school bus. I might not shrink down and enter any digestive systems, but I will talk about mental illness
Yeah.
and and the
Yeah.
important things around well-being. So,
Yeah.
the mission that we're on here. Uh and it has been an adventure. There's been some bumps along the road. There's been some moments we've overheated. There's been some times when we've had the heater broken and all types of adventures. So it's a lot like teaching in that you go in
Yeah.
and you think you got it all together and here's what the game plan's going to be, and then there's a fire drill, then somebody throws up, and then there's a parent, and then there's a
That's it.
like
Perfect.
perfect.
That's it.
The only thing to expect is unexpected.
That's
That's the
right.
one thing we can count on. So
Yes. I love it. So your happy teacher revolution, what inspired that?
so when I first started teaching, I I went into it very much hopeful and optimistic.
Hmm.
Didn't realize when I became Miss Thomas, so to speak, that there was such a gap and lack of preparedness for the emotional demands of the job.
Hmm.
And for working with children who've experienced trauma firsthand. And we know that trauma in a child's life can range from any number of things, whether it's losing a pet or losing a parent, moving neighborhoods, moving countries, experiencing a natural disaster, fire, a hurricane, witnessing an act of gun violence, surviving a global pandemic are all incidents of trauma. And they weren't praxis questions. And that
Nope.
wasn't covered in my grad school classes.
Oh,
There was no space to connect with my colleagues around some of these issues. So I felt like I was suffering in silence. I felt like I had to put on this mask and not be authentic with what my lived experience was. And
hmm
in working with children and students and their families and their stakeholders, where we were
yeah.
going through not just systemic injustices, but generational trauma,
Mhm.
so on and so forth. And so part of my experience with Happy Teacher Revolution was born before I was a teacher when I was a student. When I was
Mhm.
in high school and college, I suffered from debilitating anxiety and depression and panic
Mhm.
attacks. And I put on a brave face and tried to fake it like everything was fine, kind of like I later did as a teacher, but it was not something that was sustainable. It took like double the effort to both be depressed and anxious and then to fake like I was fine.
Yeah.
And my parents didn't necessarily notice. My friends didn't necessarily notice, but my teachers did. And they
Mhm.
recognized those subtle changes in behavior as warning signs, encouraged me to seek treatment and to get help. And they didn't just help me make it to graduation. They're the reason I'm alive today, that I get to like give you a bus ride, a
Wow.
green bus, and to hold my book and to share this message. So they're the reason I became a teacher myself. They saved
Mm.
my life. I call them my emotional first responders. You know,
Wow.
they're just like an EMT, they're just like a firefighter, they're just like anybody who responds in an emergency situation. But for me, it was emotional. It was an emotional emergency. And I get tender still talking. And I've said this a gazillion times, but
Yeah.
every presentation I've ever given, I shout out my teachers because they're the why behind this. And then I became a
Absolutely.
teacher and thought, holy moly, there's such, like I said, a gap and an unpreparedness
Yeah.
for the emotional demands of the job. And at the time, I was very outspoken about my history of mental illness. And
Mhm.
there was still such a stigma around it and secrecy around a topic that you're not meant to talk about in certain professions, but especially with folks of certain backgrounds, ages. Um, it's just something, the stigma, it still exists. So I was going to different advocacy walks. I was part of NAMI Maryland, the National Alliance of Mental Illness. I was a spokeswoman for the Music for Mental Health campaign. And because I was sharing articles and going to walks and talking about something that did make people uncomfortable, but I was willing to risk that discomfort because I thought maybe if there's one person who hears my story and chooses life, it's worth it.
Mhm.
I didn't realize how many teachers were listening to me talk and advocate about mental health awareness and my experience with mental illness. And so I started receiving just stories or messages or, knocks on my door at the end of a long school day of, hey, Miss Thomas, can I actually talk to you about something? Come to find out, there were teachers all over who had this pattern of anxiety and overwhelm when it comes to the job. I thought it
Mhm.
was just in Baltimore. I was like, oh, it's just Baltimore teachers are stressed. Everybody else is good. Come to find out, it's everybody. And it didn't matter if you went to a traditional teacher prep program or not traditional or how you found your way to this path, but everyone was stressed, anxious, overwhelmed. And this was before the pandemic.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to create a space, as we say, the time and space for teachers to feel, deal, and be real about the social emotional demands of the job. So that's how Happy Teacher Revolution was born.
When I tell you, you are speaking my dissertation right now. I literally
Yes.
put in there, traditional and alternative pathways and how these programs don't really focus on that social emotional support of teachers. That's not in the curriculum. That's not
Exactly.
in the training. And
Yes.
it's like, come on, y'all.
Yeah.
My mental well-being is just as important as my lesson plan. And
If
so,
not more. If not more.
yeah.
Because that's the foundation everything's built upon. And I believe the best SEL curriculum for students is supporting the adults.
Yes. Okay. My
That's it.
goodness. Wow.
That's
And
it.
then I love, yeah, that's it. I'm glad that you're doing this movement. I just hope that it catches on with other people listening to it, more people advocating for this. My whole goal after I graduate is that this is going to be a big part of what I'm going to advocate for in new teacher mentoring programs or induction programs in high need schools.
Yeah.
So I just feel like this is important work, and I don't care if people don't want to talk about it. We're going to talk about it. Um,
Mhm.
the reason why I got started with that work is when it was right around the pandemic. We had some new teachers come in, and one in particular, she was breaking down literally almost every day. She was new to the industry. She just didn't have a lot of experience. She had to go through one of those alternative pathway programs. They're not talking about social emotional support. and not giving her what she needs to kind of fill her cup. And she literally was crying in my office just about every single day, to the point that I was like, she's not going to make it. She is not going to make it. But she did. And I'm definitely, dedicated that work to her. So I'm
Mhm.
glad that you are speaking on and talking about it as well. So, why do you feel like it's critical for educators to prioritize mental health, their mental health anyway?
Yeah, it's absolutely necessary that educators prioritize their mental health, and not just the educators themselves. We can't put the onus all on the individual. This is
Mhm.
about systemic change. We can't self-care our way out of systemic change.
Yeah.
What needs to happen is that teacher well-being is seen and valued and invested in as absolutely necessary professional development, not an
Mhm.
auxiliary like, oh, do this before, this after, do this spring break, do this summer. No, this is PD. This is professional development.
Yeah.
We keep piling everything on the plates of these teachers. This
That's
is the
right.
plate. Okay. If we don't support the plate, it snaps, it breaks, right? These new
That's right.
teacher turnover rates are 50% in the first 5 years. That's
Yep.
costing the US $7.3 billion every year in the constant recruitment and training of new teachers, right? There's
Wow.
studies out there that show that 93% of teachers experience an overwhelming level of stress. What
Mhm.
research that has begun to be done about this has really dived into teacher burnout, teacher stress, and all of these things. And that's one thing I do want to bring up also, Francesca, is that Happy Teacher Revolution is research based and data driven.
Okay, good.
And it's really important that we are measuring and evaluating this, just like we would for guided reading, just like we would for math, just like we would, so on and so forth, right? And so that was one thing when I first started Happy Teacher Revolution, I realized was I got my master's in Hopkins in data-driven education, and there was no data on teacher well-being, on teacher mental health, on any of this.
Mhm.
And while I say it's a new frontier of research and there's more that's being done on teacher burnout, they're studying those 93% of teachers that are stressed. What we're doing is focusing on the 7%. What we're
Mm.
doing is we're measuring well being, not stress. So, the two big issues in the field today, if there's like any TLDR of this entire podcast, it's this. The
Mhm.
first thing is that the research that's being done, again, is measuring burnout, stress,
Yeah.
overwhelm. It's looking at the barriers, it's looking at the issues, it's looking at everything that's wrong.
Yeah.
It's not focused on the solutions, the protective factors, and what's going right on the well being portion of it. The second big issue that's happening in education is that we're conflating lack of burnout with well being. We're saying,
Mm.
oh, teachers aren't as burnt out. Well, that doesn't mean that they're well.
Yeah.
Teachers are surviving, doesn't mean they're thriving.
Mhm.
So we're really focused on, again, what I'm saying is the 7% of teachers that aren't reporting these levels of overwhelm and anxiety and leaving the classroom. And instead of measuring burnout, we're measuring well-being. And what we found is that folks who participated in our program and based on their preliminary well-being data are over 4.161 times more likely to stay in the field. When
Mhm.
teachers are well, they stick around. And it's
Yeah.
kind of like, oh, well, duh. But no one has done this before. No one has like collected research and tied intention of retention with well-being. So when teachers
So,
are well, they stick around. And when they're well, kids do better. Students do better.
yeah, and I'm glad you said the 7% because I'm assuming it's very hard to find that data. And then also, just how do you find the biggest thing for me is finding programs that are doing a good job with
Mhm.
focus on well-being for teachers. It's literally almost non-existent. So how
Yeah.
are you able to navigate that space?
That's tough. It's tough because what does exist is big business and marketing dollars and fancy schmancy and people who come in rolling out this PD have never set foot in a classroom and
Mhm.
teachers are like, what's this all about? And I get it because it's Happy Teacher Revolution. We're grassroots. We're 100% women owned, teacher
Mhm.
owned, teacher founded. Uh,
Yeah.
and I've 100% self funded this myself with
Yeah.
the help of Johns Hopkins University for Social Impact. We were the winners of that, and Hopkins helped us keep going. But it's tough because self care is a multi-billion-dollar industry,
Yeah.
and it very much is through the lens of privilege, of take a bubble bath, get a massage, self-soothe your way out of this stress by spending more money. And it's like time out. Sometimes self-care well-being is setting boundaries.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's taking a sick day when you're actually sick, eating
Mhm.
lunch on your lunch break, actually eating lunch, going to the bathroom when you need to go to the bathroom. These basic fundamentals. And like I said before, actually investing in well-being as professional development. So our most successful programs are ones where everyone's bought in, right? Not just the teachers, but Happy Teacher Revolution is Happy Lunch Lady Revolution, School Secretary Revolution, Bus Driver Revolution, Principal Revolution, School District Official Revolution. Like anybody in the capacity who serves and supports students has to have the time and space, like we say, to feel, deal, and be real. So we need to foster that human connection amongst the adults. So they're modeling the SEL practices like self-awareness, social awareness, relationship skills in real time, because we need
Mhm.
it now more than ever, and we need it for each other.
So with your with Happy Teacher Revolution, y'all are actually doing those PDs, correct, for schools?
Yeah. So we train folks online and in person, depending, what's accessible and available for folks, to initiate, lead, and facilitate Happy Teacher Evolution support spaces. So we call them revolutionaries. At this point, there's over 500 revolutionaries who've been trained, who are holding
Wow.
these meetings in their schools around the country and around the world, or virtually for folks. So the idea is that, yeah, that we're empowering individuals to hold these spaces within their communities because they're the expert in their community. That's the other
Yeah.
thing. I can't fly in like Mary Poppins land. Here's my, bag of tricks and leave. It's so much more valuable and there's so much more credibility when there's rapport amongst local teachers who are holding and facilitating these spaces. So that's what we do.
Wow. Okay. So this is great, and I'm going to definitely put the information in the show notes for
Yeah.
people to kind of look at. So when
Yeah.
you think about some of the long-term effects, what has your research showed you as far as poor mental health on teachers and students? And let me
Yeah.
tell you something. There's a lot of research on mental health and students and well-being of students. Very little on teachers, and I think we just talked about it. You got to really support those teachers who support the students.
Right, that part. Yeah. And as a student that struggled with mental health, like I'm so glad that there is research
Yeah.
and resources and that exists now.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. There's a huge gap when it comes to the adults and to the
Mhm.
teachers. And so the research that's been coming out, I had mentioned the one about 93% of teachers being stressed out. So if we look at just the US alone, there's 3.6 million teachers in the US, give or take. That means that an estimated 3.3 million teachers are stressed out, which means an estimated 80 million children are sitting in the classroom of or on a Zoom call with a stressed out teacher. Well, what matters is that there's also research that's linked from Arizona State University has linked teacher depression to low student math scores.
Mm.
And there's been a study from the University of British Columbia in Canada where they actually took biometric data. They had saliva samples from teachers and that of their students. And the middle school students, I got to meet the researchers of this particular study, and they said the middle schoolers who participated loved it, got to just spit in
Wow.
these like containers. But the study,
Science project.
right, science project, right? Like, guess what we did in class today?
Yeah.
So what they had found is that they were measuring, you can measure in saliva the stress hormone that we call cortisol. And they found that teachers with higher levels of cortisol correspondingly had students with higher levels of cortisol and vice versa.
Wow.
So stress is contagious. And
Mhm.
the last big piece of the why behind the work is a study from Yale University, Yale Child Study Center, uh, held a study specifically for early childhood educators, and they found that early childhood educators who are stressed, burnt out, low job satisfaction are more likely to suspend and refer students of color more than white students and boys more than girls at a rate of 4 times as much.
Wow.
And in places like Baltimore, there's research that shows that student suspension and referral rates at that young in early childhood could impact reading levels by third grade. And in cities like Baltimore, they use third grade reading levels to decide how many prison cells to build in Baltimore City. So it is
Mhm.
a very explicit school to prison pipeline. And so if we're not supporting teacher mental health and well-being, we're not adequately supporting student social emotional learning, we're not adequately supporting student academic achievement, and we're perpetuating the school to prison pipeline. So it's a social justice issue. It's an equity issue at this point.
Definitely. Yeah. And then, and I'm just thinking about the different levels of stress, and I want to kind of make it clear to our audience that looks different for teachers. Sometimes it could be loud. It could be a teacher that is, so stressed out that it comes off aggressive to the students, but sometimes it can be quiet.
Yeah.
It could be not involved. I remember when my child came home and she was like, my teacher's different. And I was like, what do you mean by that? Well, she's just sitting there and she's not teaching anymore. And I was like, really? And she's like, and I don't like it. And I
Mm.
was thinking, and for me, I was like, what is going on? What is happening with that teacher that she has a major difference? And so when you talked about stress, that level of stress can transfer to the students. I felt like it was causing even my kid a little bit of stress because she wasn't able to gauge what was going on with her teacher. It was causing concern. And so,
Yeah.
some form of stress there. So I just want to make sure that people understand it could be loud, it could be quiet, it could just be, but it is there.
Yeah. Yeah, 1000%. And you're right, it can show up and look different. And there's different uh, ways that it could potentially manifest. So there's caregiver burnout, which teachers can burn out and experience burnout the
Yeah.
first week of their first year of school. New teachers can absolutely experience burnout, which is different than compassion fatigue, which is a cumulative effect over long periods of time. So that oftentimes educators who've been in the classroom year in and year out can experience compassion fatigue, which is a loss of compassion, not just for their students, but for themselves, for their
Mhm.
family at home, for the caregiving their elderly parents, so on and so forth. And then there's moral distress, which is an actual when you believe what should happen does not happen, which
Mm,
results in a carrying of dissonance in the body at the cellular level. You can feel
wow.
this dissonance. And so these can all happen simultaneously, not to mention vicarious trauma, which is working with individuals who've experienced trauma firsthand. You can
Mhm.
experience it as if you had been the one who witnessed it secondhand. So, for example, in Baltimore, the rates of gun violence are actually higher than that, and exposure to gun violence, which can result in PTSD. Those rates of PTSD are higher than that of our soldiers coming home from overseas. And this
Mhm.
isn't just Baltimore, this is Detroit and other places where gun violence is rampant. But I've never witnessed an act of gun violence, but there were students in my classroom who did.
Yeah.
And there was no support around what these noticings of vicarious trauma. I didn't witness that, but PTSD is something that must be spoken about and shed light on for educators as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is really good. And I keep thinking, how do we change a school culture to embrace learning and understanding, how important mental well-being is for teachers? And I always go back to the leadership.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I just feel like, I don't know, you may disagree. I feel like it starts with the leadership activities, and just how does that play into supporting mental health for teachers?
Yeah, it's tremendously impactful when leaders see and value their staff as human beings and not human doings, and actually
Mhm.
put skin in the game. Doesn't doesn't just send a quick email with a self-care article attached at the end of the email along with all the things that are due at end of business, right? Like actually invest in it and is part of it as well. So I'll just talk about one of our successful pilot sites where we launched in Salem Kaiser schools in Salem Kaiser, Oregon, and their superintendent uses the language of Happy Teacher Evolution and implements, you know, uh, some of our practices from top down and bottom up. But the reason that they're so tremendous and incredible is that they reached out to Happy Teacher Evolution because they were really looking to support not just their student mental health, but their teacher mental health. There, unfortunately, in Salem Kaiser schools was an increase in student attempted suicides and student completed suicides. And
Wow.
as a result, they were really focused on supporting the staff members in those buildings where either it was attempted or completed, as well as new teachers who were coming into the school district. And so I had the opportunity to train folks all over the district, the school counselors in each school, as well as the professors who are working with the student teachers who are going to be teaching in the schools, along with the superintendent, had exposure to our curriculum and our pedagogy and all of it. And they were all in, like I said, top down and bottom up. So it's something that we all need to embrace together, and that leaders, when leaders are bought in, it makes such a difference for the teachers because they're like, oh, I have permission to take care of myself now. I didn't realize that. And it's such a mindset shift. It's not the question of who's taking care of when there's this phrase, it's uh it'll come to me. I just totally blanked.
Mhm.
But I think that what's really important is that teachers feel like they have permission to take care of themselves as a best practice to implement all of the things they're expected to do professionally. And it's even more expensive to replace the cost of a principal who leaves, of a district staff member who leaves, that those turnover costs are even higher. So it's really important that we keep people's well-being in mind.
Yeah, and I like that you said if they embrace this, it's going to be a mindset shift. Okay, it's
Yeah.
going to be that superintendent. I'm loving that you got the superintendent to buy in.
Yeah.
Starting there and then trickling its way down is going to be a changed school culture, right? And
Yes,
I'm sure you
exactly.
saw that.
Exactly. And it just came, the phrase was, it takes a village to raise a child,
Yes.
but who's taking care of the village? Like,
Oh,
who's making sure that they're good?
okay.
That perspective is not something that folks who are principals, who are superintendents, they didn't go through this journey with their well-being in mind ever. The school system was not built with adult well-being in mind. So,
Hmm.
of course, this is kind of radical. Of course, this is revolutionary. Of course, this is flipping the script altogether by saying, wait, time out. The best way to take care of kids is by taking care of the grown-ups. How can
Yeah.
we do that better?
Yeah. Well, you know what? Keep doing what you're doing. I really do appreciate our conversation. What's
Me
next for
too.
you,
I feel
Pam?
like I can talk to you forever.
Look, I think we got to come back on to this part two, especially when I'm done with all my research. I'm literally in the middle of my comprehensive exams and I've got to submit those on Friday. And everything we're talking about is in that paper. And
Yes.
so I
Well,
am with you. I am with you right over here in Georgia trying to
yes.
support it.
Yeah, wow, that means so much to me because when I started this, like I felt so alone. I thought,
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody else like gets this, understands this, is invested in and passionate about this. I started our Instagram account crying in the staff bathroom of where I worked because I felt so isolated and alone. I thought maybe somebody on social media will understand and want more of a positive narrative. I didn't want to normalize crying at work, like, oh,
Yeah.
you're a teacher, cry at work. And I'm like, no, I don't want to normalize that. And I want to create a virtual presence that's
Yeah.
positive and uplifting, and people can tag their homies and just like have that positivity trend and go viral in that way amongst the people who need it and who crave it, like a
Yeah.
positivity twilight zone. And so the fact that like this started from tears and this started from overwhelm, and now I'm cheesing so hard getting to talk to you, and that we got to connect virtually and
Yeah.
this platform in the space and your entrepreneurial ventures and ambition.
Yeah.
Like, I think teachers make incredible entrepreneurs, and that there is a huge opportunity to boost confidence of teachers who have brilliant ideas because they are absolutely brilliant. That, anything I can do to help support folks who are teacher founders, who are female founders, founders of color, like anyone who has that idea and thinks, I think there's something to it, make the leap, dive head first. Like I am literal proof of
Anymore.
what
Yeah.
of what that is, and I just
Yeah.
yeah, and like keep writing and keep working and keep sharing the message, because once my physical body is gone, like the body of work is still there, and I hope somebody takes it and keeps going with it. That's
Yeah.
that's the dream.
And what's part two of Happy Teacher Revolution? What's next? What are we doing, ma'am?
Here we are. I'm trying to build this teacher ecosystem. I
Okay.
can't be the only one
That's
who's
right.
training revolutionaries to facilitate spaces. I need folks who are willing to become trainers themselves. So we launched Train the Trainer. And so, we're looking for folks to get trained to lead the support groups and then to get trained up to train even more people to lead the support groups. That's the dream. Because
Okay.
I think that in terms of scalability and sustainability, it's so important that we get more folks exposed to this body of work and this curriculum, even if they're not quite ready to lead or facilitate a meeting yet. The professional learning piece is so deeply needed. I wrote this book because it was what I needed to read when I first started teaching. It
Mm-hmm.
features voices of 50 plus educators from all over the country and all different grade levels and backgrounds with QR codes to their videos of them talking more in their classrooms, along with coloring pages. So one of the things we do is we have affirmations that choose to be mindful. Perfect. I just
Yes.
opened up for yours, but you don't even have to read it. You could just color in it.
Color. Oh, look, I'm up here thinking about the teacher's lounge
Yeah.
and having color sheets all over the teacher's lounge and crayons and markers so they can come in there and just kind of have a break, you
Yeah,
know? Wow. Okay.
exactly. And there's also an audiobook version. So I got to narrate it in New York City. So anybody who prefers to listen to a book,
Yeah.
there are options there too.
Love it. Well, you know what? Thank you so much for joining us today on
Uh,
everything but the lesson plan. I am excited about your journey and what you have next. I'm definitely going to follow you. Your information is going to be in the show notes. So, people, just make sure you connect with Happy Teacher Revolution. Our listeners, whether you're an educator, administrator, or just someone who cares about teacher well being, let's continue to have this conversation like we did today. Be real loud about it, right? And then after that, do some deep breathing exercises.
uh,
Visit Happy Teachers Revolution and learn more on how you can how you can join and support this initiative. And thank you once again, Dana, for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm glad that Begonia could join us for the podcast.
Yes.
Also, Begonia the bus.
Yes. Remember, people, you can't pour from an empty cup. So definitely, figure out a way for your self-care and it's going to reach beyond the classroom. Until next time, stay inspired, stay balanced, and keep making a difference. Good night.